Hello, this is Steven. The, Sop-
The Sopranos, well, background.
really the main cast out of the way. Let's get into the supporting, the supporting characters. I'm not really going to reveal too much on the actors' names in this portion, but I feel like these are some important characters that pop up throughout the series and, do play somewhat of a role during the show going forward. Let's start off with little Carmine Lupitazzi, who is the son of Carmine Lupitazzi Sr., and these guys are essentially based in the New York area. During the show, we actually do get some mobsters from New York who come over to do business with the Soprano crew, with the New Jersey crew. Speaking of New York, we also have Phil Leotardo, who is of course portrayed by Frank Vincent. I remember him from Goodfellas and Casino. He was great in those mob roles, so it was really great when they got him to appear. We also here have characters that, cause, I would say, problems for Tony very much throughout the series. We've got Janice Soprano, who is, Tony's sister, and she's definitely a character that, you just love to hate, I would say. But then you got characters within Tony's crew that give him headaches. These included, recently released mobsters like Richie Aprile, whose brother Jackie Aprile was actually the boss of the New Jersey crime family during the beginning episodes of the series. We also have another one, Ralph Cifaretto, and he's a very colorful. These two are very colorful characters, and we get more about them in the review. Other members of Tony's crew include Vito Spatafori, who has a very unique storyline, and I want to get into that later. And we have a Big Pussy Bompancero, a beloved character during the first two seasons, and arguably has a honestly portrayed by Vincent Pastore, who, like, you could just see this guy and he just screams this guy's a mobster. Other guys within the Soprano crew include Hesh, who is actually not Italian. He's not really a mobster. He's an associate. He does business with them. He's a Jewish mobster who, Tony's father used to work with a lot back in the day, and he still continues that presently with Tony, now. So that we kind of get that. We have Meadow. Sorry, not Meadow. Adriana, who is Christopher's girlfriend and fiance. It's kind of this on again, off again with them throughout the series, but they're really great. We also here have Steve Buscemi in the role of Tony Blondetto, who is essentially Tony's cousin, or Tony B as they refer to him as. He plays the role in season 5, and he's very much a character I want to get into in this review. We have Johnny Sack here, who is really a mobster from the New York crew, but he's kind of like an emissary or a guy that's kind of the go-between between the New York crime family and the Soprano crew. And then, of course, we have arguably one of the most villainous women in the history of television, Olivia Soprano, who is Tony's mother. And, she's a very interesting character, and I'll get into that later in the review. Anyway, with really the important casts out of the way, let's actually hop into this review, shall we? Let's get into season 1. Now, like most televisions, the pilot can sometimes be a different product to what will later come on in the show. But here in the first episode, we essentially get an insight to what we are going to see throughout the series run. The pilot is called... the entire episode is called Sopranos, and basically, we see a shot, well, not really so short, but the first scene is Tony Soprano going to Dr. Melfi, who of course will be a beloved reoccurring character throughout the series. And basically, Tony has gone to therapy. And this is borrowed from a real-life incident where mobster Frank Costello was actually seeing a psychiatrist. So I get that was kind of the reference, but later in the series, they also Analyze This, which was a mob movie which starred Robert De Niro and Chaz Palminteri and Billy Crystal, which kind of revolves around the same premise of a mobster going to therapy, though This Is It's meant to be really more of a comedy. So The Sopranos takes that concept, but they do it in a serious way. And basically, in the first episode, we see, Tony, what he's dealing with, with mob business, with his fellow crews, where with his fellow crew. So here we get introduced to Junior, who, you know, is an old school mobster. He's his uncle. And is, you know, and they have very close, strong relationship. We see how that gets affected throughout the series. We also see him, of course, relationships with guys from his crew, like Pussy Bompensero, Silvio Dante, and Paulie Walnuts. And we, of course, also see the relationship with Christopher Moltisanti. Now, Christopher Moltisanti is really Carmela's cousin, but Tony calls him his nephew, and they have this really father-son bond here. Also in the episode, we really get to see the violence that Tony and his crew would inflict, and like I wouldn't say it's tame because there is violence, but we understand that, you know, there are in the mob. Also, I just love the authenticity. Like, you get, like, these are real gangsters, you know, and they're in New Jersey. You know, and to be honest, and something we'll find out, the New Jersey criminals, they have this sort of working class allure they have. And, you know, the way they dress, you can tell they are mobsters. They are the Italian mobsters that I guess are glamorized or portrayed in the media. And I really like that. James Gandolfini, who plays Tony Soprano, the way he talks, though, in this episode, is not the accent that we would expect later down the line. That's because the pilot was filmed in advance and they tried to get it to other studios, or not studios, sorry, other networks to see who wanted to pick it up, but only HBO picked it up. The rest turned it down, and I'm guessing they're regretting it because it's considered one of the greatest television shows ever made. But as much as we're dealing with his mobster life, we're also dealing with his family life. And, you know, he is a family man. He has a wife, Carmela. He has 2 kids, Meadow and AJ. And, you know, it's a pretty difficult, and it's very much difficult trying to balance those two worlds. We've seen that in medias before, where the criminal is trying to balance his criminal life and his personal life, his private life. And we also find that Tony, something that'll be apparent in the series, he has a soft spot for animals. He can't, as ducks come to his pool, and, you know, he goes to feed them. So he has a soft spot for animals, and really doesn't like it when animals get hurt. It's also during this episode where Tony suffers a heart attack. An anxiety attack. And basically that's why he's in therapy. He's giving all his problems. But the biggest source of his stress or problems is his mother, Olivia Soprano, who is this really old Italian lady, very stubborn, very, you know, difficult, and does undermine Tony a lot. And, you know, this is arguably, you know, and this does affect very much a lot of the source throughout the series, but also sets up the character here that Tony does love his mother, but, you know, she is very, very difficult. And I can understand, and honestly, just having a mother like that, geez, I think would turn anyone crazy, to be honest. And that's really the pilot episode, and it really kicks off the series of what we are expecting to see. And honestly, you know, that this is really going to be just as much as a crime drama. We're going to see some violence, and we're going to really see some problems for our characters to go on further down the line. Another event that happens in Season 1 is a power struggle. You see, Tony's best friend, Jackie Aprile, is the current acting boss of the New Jersey crime family, but he is falling deathly ill. And as a result of that, out comes a little bit of a power struggle between who's going to take over the family. Believe it or not, the really seniority guy to really take over, or at least in line to take over, is Junior Soprano, or Corrado Soprano Jr. Everyone calls him Junior. And he's paid his dues, being in the mob the longest. We also see, you know, Tony and the other capos. You see, during the early series, in the early episodes, Tony was a captain, though the pilot indicated he was already the boss. He's already a powerful captain within the New Jersey crew, and many of the capos want him to take over. And so a bit of a power struggle is happening. We also see Christopher, at this point in the series, is an associate. He's not a made guy, but he's trying to get made along with his friend Brendan Falone, who, you know, are kind of these young, the classic case of what you would call wannabe punk, the wannabes, you know, those who want to get made, but, you know, for the most part, they do come off as incompetent and silly and goofy. We would see many of characters like that really in season 2 and especially season 3. But, you know, Brandon is a character that I could see was going to get, you know, bumped off. And unfortunately, he does. They get into some kind of hijacking trouble, which results in Brendan getting hit courtesy of Junior ordering the hit, partly because he was manipulated by Olivia. Now let's get back to Olivia. Olivia, Tony's mother, eventually, you know, is sent to a nursing home, or as Tony keeps telling him, it's a retirement community. This is because he doesn't really want her to leave her alone. She calls the housefather, tried having a living maid, but she quits with a hint of it was possibly racism on Olivia's part. But just when Tony thinks it's fine with her living on her own, she ends up getting hit by a car. And this results in, you know, him putting her in a nursing home. Angry at what essentially her son did to her, she, you know, does manipulate Junior, who is a rising power in the crime, who is a very much established captain in the crime family. With Jackie pretty much on death's door and not yet electing a successor, there's a real tension here, and this is something we also get introduced in the series: the constant democracy and the ever-changing atmosphere of it all. Especially since in this era that we're experiencing in the show, you know, the classic days of the mob are kind of long gone. The glory days, they're left with what's very little. You know, with Omerta, I mean, the mob's still there, but it doesn't have the power or the influence that it used to have. And you can tell that, you know, there's a lot of power vacuum, you know, being developed with this. Eventually, unfortunately, Jackie Aprile dies, and there's a power vacuum left in the mob. As a result of that, Tony, courtesy of his therapy with Dr. Melfi, decides to concede and give the title of boss to Junior. And this is a good part because, one, everyone knows he's really running the show because he can kind of control Junior, but the idea is so Junior can take the hits from law enforcement while he really runs the family. This is a position really called the front boss. The New Jersey crime family had that a lot, where they would have someone as the front boss, like Fat Tony Salerno, while a guy like Vincent the Chin Gigante really ran things from behind the scenes. So that's kind of what they're trying to really go with here. Also, it's during this point in the show, like especially at the funeral, where, you know, where AJ, Tony's son, who is a bit innocent, naive, really just like a kid you would expect, eventually has the doors open to him, or his eyes widen, that he realized that his father is not a normal father. His father is a notorious crime boss, which Meadow reveals to him. And this really, I wouldn't say hurts him, but he then, you know, has to come to the realization that, you know, he doesn't have the most normal, he hasn't come from a very normal family. I guess he kind of has to come to the realization of that in many ways. In another episode which I really liked in the series, and it's arguably one of those groundbreaking episodes on not just the series but television history, called College. This is really where really get to see the both sides of Tony. The episode is basically Tony taking Meadow to colleges. And basically, we see Tony as the caring father figure. There's a scene when he's driving with Meadow. Meadow asks him blatantly, straight out, "Are you in the mafia? Are you in the mob?" Tony says, "No, I am not." And something he would always do is saying it's offensive that, you know, every Italian American must be a mobster. But, of course, as we know, you know, he is. But he does slightly begin to open up and say, you know, that he might do some criminal acts. Not full confirmation he's in the mob, but, you know, kind of opening up that, you know, he's not, like, he does do some things that are illegal. And this is really the relationship where he's slowly trying to open up to have a more honest and real relationship with Meadow. But during his time on the, I would say, not really the run, oh, not really, when he's doing these college trips, he finds out there's an old mobster that he remembered from back on the day. An old school mob and rat who basically results in sending many mobsters to prison. And the code is, if you see a mob rat, he is to be killed on sight. And Tony's trying to balance two aspects of trying to catch up with the rat, but also, do with this Meadow to college thing. We also get a scene of Olivia, who is, at home with all this, and the local priest comes around. They do this sermon or whatever you would call it, and this really, shows like the complexity of Olivia. Having to, not really realizing, but how she has to accept that all this comes from blood money. We find a little bit more about her character. She wants this independence to be not shackled to a man, but she's not really willing to work for it. She hates the idea of earning things by herself. So we kind of do get that. Eventually in the episode, Tony does catch up to the mob rat and kills him. This is the first time, I think, an anti-hero kills does a killing on screen. From what I hear, the producers didn't want to do a killing like this unless it was justified in Tony's favor, but Chase wanted to do it because Chase wanted to have a character that is so unique and complex, and I'm really glad they really went for it. They tried to make it, that Tony might be in the right to killing him as the rat finds him out and tries to hire drug dealers to kill him. But Tony gets up to him and doesn't shoot him, but literally strangles him to death. And then he looks up in the air and sees, I don't know if it's a flock of geese or ducks or whatever, like a flock of feathered creatures fly in the air, signifying, I guess the innocence or, the life that he's chosen. And then we end the episode with him driving off with Meadow, and he, can't reveal what he's done. And just when they were just about to have an honest relationship, it is quickly destroyed. And what I love about this episode, College, is it shows the two sides of Tony. The two different, sides of him, but also just how much of a complex and nuanced character he is. True, he could be a nice guy and a gentle Joe, but he's also this violent mobster scumbag. Again, he does become a bit more scumbag in later seasons, but he has this more likable quality, this likable Joe you like to have a drink down at the local pub. Even when he does these acts like that, you can't help but like the guy. And he has this light in him. And it's not just that, but the entire season itself, it's just so light. And then again, things will happen down the line that will change that. Again, that's for later seasons. But let's get through all of season 1 first. Another interesting episode is Pax Soprano, where Junior is appointed boss of the crime family, but he's, causing problems with everyone. And eventually Tony has to find a way to, soothe things out. And it does, but it also results in, Junior now on the top of the FBI's radar to get him. But we also see another thing the series is known for, the very complicated relationship with Tony and Olivia. Because they're a very complicated relationship, to say the least. And this is mostly due to, I think, Olivia finding out. First off, in the first episode, Tony does reveal to, Carmela, reveals to Carmela that she's seeing a psychiatrist. And she finds it funny or great. But then in the college episode at the end, she finds out from Tony that the, therapy is a woman. And she is kind of threatened by this. Don't get me wrong, Tony is known to be unfaithful, constantly having gumaras or mistresses on the side. But this is a woman that even Tony is, developing a very much of an attraction to. And I can see that. And it's easy to see why. Throughout the series, there's a hint of would Tony, get with the good doctor, but it's not entirely sure, I would say that. Other things that happen in the season is, as we get more further and further, is Christopher's story arc of wanting to become made in the crime family. Also, AJ, developing certain symptoms of, I guess, having, I would say the same symptoms of, having father like son, of him being this kid, who's constantly getting into trouble and all that. And, it's a hint of, what Tony had to put up with as a kid. And we get a bit of a flashback in a later episode of what Tony grown up life was with his father and his family life, all that. Another interesting thing that happens in the season is, again, Tony's trying to hide from everyone that he's in therapy, because in the mob, you're not supposed to. It's taboo, and it's just really just a bad image to have. But however, what does end up happening is eventually, through AJ, accidentally reveals it to Olivia. Olivia then reveals to Junior that, Tony is seeing a psychiatrist, and this eventually causes problems down the line in the series. And as a result, Junior orders a hit on Tony, and it's almost reminiscent to The Godfather, where the hitman tried to kill Vito Corleone, but Tony manages to somehow not only survive the hit, but barely, but also takes out his opponents too. He eventually begins to suspect that something was really off with this attempted carjacking, which they kind of pull that, have it believe it was a carjacking, but really it wasn't. Eventually, the FBI, who, pops up throughout the series, was one particular agent, Agent Harris, who, honestly, I like the actor. Not only he, you see him and he pulls off not only playing a law enforcement officer, but a person is true to his oath, true to his role, and, just is a genuinely nice, decent guy. Also, and because of this, the FBI has a secret tape that they play where Junior and Olivia conspire to order the hit on Tony. This is where Tony finds out that not only Junior did the hit, which I guess he can't really entirely blame Junior for, because he was kind of breaking the rules, but he can't really accept that, so he does take a little bit of his frustration out on Junior. But he's shocked that his mother went along with this, so it's really shocking. Another thing I like about the season is a friendship Tony has with a guy named Artie. I should have mentioned him in the cast, but Artie is essentially a guy that runs the local restaurant where all the mobsters and their families hang out. It's shown that Artie and Tony go way back. They were friends in high school, but while Tony went down the criminal life, Artie went down the normal life, the normal guy. And out of all his friendships, Tony always valued Artie above all. And they would get into some fights, but it's always quickly reciprocated. You can tell like these two are just lifelong friends. And I think out of everyone, he genuinely values this friendship, because I don't think the guy ever judged Tony. We also find out later in the season that Tony made out with Artie's wife back when they were teenagers, in fact when they were dating, but nothing ever happened to it, because Artie's wife did not wanted to make her own living and not fully rely on Tony, so she went down a different path and obviously married Artie. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because he does play a little bit of a role, especially during the final episodes of the season. As this is happening, of course, Tony and his crew devise a plan to, take down Junior. They end up taking down his top hitman, Chucky, the consigliere, what's his name? I forget his name for the time being, but he's this guy that, no one really likes. And this essentially results in, eventually, at the end of the season, Junior getting arrested. Because he is swamped with indictments along with other high-profile guys within the, I guess, leadership, but most of the capos aren't really affected, except for maybe one, Jimmy Altieri, who we find out, in an episode later in the season, he was having a card game with Big Pussy, Bob and Sarah and some other guys until it was raided by the FBI, but Big Pussy decides to make a run for it, but he's quickly apprehended. Throughout the episode, Pussy is complaining about his back and how it's sore. Tony, to his bent cop, comes to him and basically tells him flat out that Pussy might be a rat. Tony can't believe this because he and Pussy go way back. They were best friends and they're very close. So he wants the full confirmation first. So what does he do? He actually, has Paulie try and search, to see if it was, see if Pussy really is a rat. Eventually, at the end of the episode, Pussy basically goes on the lam. But whilst this is happening, Jimmy is out and starts acting suspicious. Tony then puts one and one together and realizes that Jimmy might have been the rat the cop was talking about, but they can't get a full confirmation because the cop committed suicide. As a result of that, Tony, manages to orchestrate a essential hit on Altieri with Junior's blessing. And this was way before the whole coming out that Junior might have been, the guy responsible for trying to kill Tony. As this is going on, they kill. As this is going on, Melfi is in danger, so Tony has her go into hiding to protect her, so she doesn't get harmed. We then end the season on surprisingly the closest thing to a really good note, or happy ending, you could say, for the series. And that was, Tony, Silvio Dante, and Paulie all essentially having dinner. Along with family. And Tony says, if you're lucky enough, you will only remember the good times. This line will be brought up later in the final episode of the series. And I'll get more into that when I get to review that part in this very long video review. Also, I wonder what happened. Also, Ori. Now, I need to bring him back up just for 1 minute. Olivia wants to get revenge on Tony so bad. He reveals to Ori that Tony played a role in his original restaurant blowing up. See, in the pilot episode of the series, Ori's restaurant was blown up as a hit attempt to kill one of Junior's enemies, big enemies. But it affected Ori and his family quite badly. Eventually, they did manage to get everything back up. And once it's revealed to Artie Tony did this, he actually tries to kill Tony, but Tony manages to talk him down. And normally Tony would take retribution on people who do this, but but he doesn't. He lets Artie live, which is very interesting because really Tony rarely ever does that to anyone. So it really shows just how he's willing to let Artie live even with this attempted murder. So it really just shows the close relationship. Anyway, so that's how we really end the season. There. How do I feel about the season so far? It's actually a pretty solid season. I like how there's a short amount of episodes. There's really one episode, I think it was this season. Was it this season? Or maybe not. Oh, sorry, no, it's for a later season, sorry. But, for the most part, the season's pretty damn decent and good. You know that this is not this show pioneered what we expect from television dramas now. And honestly, there's so many great characters, but also look at how these characters are. These characters are going to be drastically different to how they started off here to how they end off at the end of the series. Anyway, let's get into my personal thoughts for season 2. In season 2, we pick up really not that long. I think maybe a year had passed, or kind of. And basically, Junior is locked up and is about to go on trial for being the supposed leader of the New Jersey crime family. Tony pretty much takes control of the family, and basically wipes out most of the loyalists from Junior's crew. These included a mobster, Spoons, courtesy of one of Tony's trusted guys, Gino. He basically wipes out everyone except for one guy, Bobby Bagliacchi, who is basically a son of one of an old school guy who was long respected. I believe he pops up in, I think it's this season, I think, or actually no, it's the next season he pops up, sorry. But basically, he's basically this mobster that looks like I call him a mobster teddy bear, because even though he's a gangster, he's really like the kindest one of the bunch. He's not a monster. And he's basically allowed to live. Junior is still given the title of boss, but all of the rackets he has are now under Tony's control. He will give him a cut, but basically he's going to be running the show from now on. We also see the character of a guy named these two guys with Christopher, who basically I believe their name, one of them, a name is a guy named Lockwood, and he has this best friend, and essentially these guys running running with Christopher, and like Christopher too, they want to be made guys in the New Jersey crew. Pussy also comes out of hiding and basically is welcomed back into the family. All is forgiven because he gives a good explanation and why he's into hiding, and they check it, and it adds up. Also, like Tony's feeling uneasy because Melfi, is not really in hiding, but she's not doing her practice, and a while drops Tony as a potential patient. Well, as a result, he's kind of struggling to really do anything. I mean, it's clear, especially from season 1, Tony, really, got his great ideas courtesy of his therapy, which is really bad for a criminal when you really think about it. It's also here in the season we are introduced to Janice, one of Tony's sisters. Tony has another sister, but she pops up in very little moments throughout the series. And basically, Tony is envious because Janice pretty much left and bolted, and he had to deal with, the mother all on his lonesome. So there is a very much a strained relationship there. Throughout the season, Tony, is trying to win, Melfi back to become a patient again. But he's also now has to deal with a member to the Soprano crew that is now back, and that is Richie Aprile, who is Jackie's older brother. He did a 10-year prison stint, and he's out, and he's causing all sorts of havoc. This will be something that the series kind of would play a little bit, where these old-timers, or people that Tony, like guys in the crew are coming, back to the New Jersey area and just cause problems for Tony and the crime family. Richie, even though he is short, he is, I'd say, just sadistic, cruel, and he even, rekindles a relationship with Janice. In fact, the two dated back in the day. Another thing that also Tony is kind of dealing with his mother, because there's a very restrained relationship from the past season is a complete understatement. But Christopher is slowly, is very conflicted with all of the basically like problems. The classic what the series does is always introducing new problems for Tony to deal with as the series went on. Eventually, Tony goes to Sicily in this season to go and essentially have a business deal with the Sicilian crime family. We get a bit of what I like about this episode. We get a bit of a culture clash or a bit of a conflict with how these proper Italian guys up in there, how that mafia is run compared to the New Jersey crew. Tony really loves the place, while Paulie is not really a fan because Paulie goes along with Christopher. And here they're introduced to another member who become very prominent in the New Jersey crime family as they bring back over with them is a guy named Furio. He's this old school Italian guy. He's more of the old school, really brutal, like no holds bar, but even so he does live by a very strong a sensible code. Then we get more of his character later on. As soon as he gets to New Jersey, it kind of rubs Christopher the wrong way. Like, he's not a bad guy. I mean, he's nice around kids, he's this nice guy, but when he comes into business, all that's out the window. And I think, like, Christopher does warm up to Furio, and Furio does warm up to Christopher, so we get a bit of that. And Tony really likes him as a really valuable enforcer. We also find out in the season that Pussy is actually an FBI informant, but Pussy is conflicted about being an informant because he's known Tony for years. And, he's very hesitant about it. And it's revealed because the reason why he's an informant because he was pushing H. And as a result, got busted. And rather than doing a big prison stint, he does this. Becomes informant. He was at one point basically has to wear a wire at AJ's confirmation. In this season, AJ's getting into a lot of trouble. A little bit. Meadow kind of fades for me, at least in this season, with whatever she's up to. It's really more in the next season where she gets her own unique storyline, which I'll get to when we reach the season 3. At one point, Tony decides to take more of a back seat and do more of the legal work and be less involved in running the mob. But, he just can't take it. That's just not what he does. We also hear this season, AJ, tries to do movie making, something that will come back really later in season 6, but it just doesn't really, like, it works for a bit, but it also doesn't. Another thing this season that I really liked is with Richie's character. As soon as he's in, he tries to make a power move to possibly take over and run the reins of the crime family. Of course, he's doing it in secret. He even tries to get Junior on board with him, but Junior decides not to. He'd rather stick with Tony. We also find out really where the really evil side of Tony really comes out in one episode. Well, a little bit of an episode. Uh, with basically a friend of his, who is a gambling addict, and they go way back, asked to be a part of this card game. Tony tries to do his best to make sure he doesn't get involved, but once he gets involved, he basically leaves him on his own and racks up a huge, gambling debt that he owes to both Tony and also Richie. Because of this, he basically becomes part of what's called a bust out scheme. As a result, he has to basically do this sellout thing with all this credit to the point where he closes up shop, business is in debt, and loses everything. And Tony doesn't really jump in to help. Even he says he knew something like this would happen, but it's in his nature to do something like this. As a result, he loses a friend because of his scumbag criminal nature. Also, something that really happens this season is, first off, it involves Chris. We go back to Christopher again. See, this season, what happens? I explained those two wannabe guys that were kind of following him throughout the season. Eventually, at some point, they switch sides and begin working with Richie Aprile. Eventually, Richie Aprile says how he's getting annoyed with Tony and definitely with Christopher. So the two numbskulls decide to whack Christopher to show their loyalty or to get further made in the mob. It kind of backfires as they shoot Christopher, but he ends up getting just really badly hurt and is sent to hospital. But one of these two wannabes get killed during their attempted shooting. And Bubba Lockwood ends up making a run for it. He tries to get help from Richie, but when Richie finds out, he goes ballistic. Because he knows, this was an unsanctioned hit. This is technically Tony's nephew. This will bring down heat. So basically, Bubba Lockwood's on his own, and he's on the run. Pussy bumping Sarah throughout this, even though he's an informant throughout the whole season, and he's conflicted, there was a moment where he actually went to rejoin the FBI. And that was, to be fully committed. And that was because of Furio. Tony is showing more favor to Furio. Silvio is being more in the concierge position. And Paulie is up there top with really saying what's running. You could say what's left of really Tony's crew. He becomes a sort of more of a capo regime during this season. If that's even a thing. If that's even kind of hard to, I guess, swallow. Well, kind of like a top tier position. So for a while, he's Pussy is actually trying to provide information with the FBI. He tries to reinvent himself, but it doesn't work out. After Christopher is shot very badly, Richie goes and tries to help, Tony find Bevel Lockwood. It's also interesting, the Christopher's girlfriend and fiance, Adriana, is actually very much related to Richie. So they are pretty much, so we get that. And we find out that Richie says something to Christopher, don't hit a woman unless you're married to her. Ironically, that will come to bite him in the ass later in the season, but we'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, Tony and Pussy eventually track down Barbara Lockwood and kill him. An eyewitness comes forward saying he claims who he believed did the killings, but retracts when he finds out that these killers are actually mobsters and essentially Pussy is saved. Richie does bite it in this season as he does get married to Janice. And Tony, goes along with it even though he doesn't like this, he doesn't like Janice. But eventually, an argument, which was more of a heat of the moment thing, Janice accidentally kills Richie Aprile, resulting in his death. Tony has to get rid of the body, so he gets Furio to help. Janice is sent out in New York. And the mother and Olivia, Tony's mother, ends up moving back into the old house. So Tony's problems just keep getting worse and worse. But here we get to the final episode of the season, and this would start what the series would become also semi-known for: Tony's many dream sequences. And this was courtesy of a bad food poisoning incident that he had, and as a result, he is having these bizarre, erratic dreams where his subconscious is basically telling him that pussy is a rat. He gets proof, and so, Tony, Silvio, and Paulie end up, Paulie, Silvio end up taking pussy on a boat along with Tony, and we get this confrontation. It's a really brilliant scene as you get all actors as Pussy comes forward after being pressured, and you can really tell Pussy knows he's at the end of his rope. He's going to die, but you can also see the anger with Silvio and Paulie, because these guys go way back. They all do. They have this nice, calm conversation, but just when, we just think they might just spare Pussy to end up shooting him in the chest, around the heart. I guess it's symbolizing just how betrayed they felt. Eventually, they wrap Pussy up and throw him overboard, and he sinks. And, this killing affects Tony quite a lot throughout the series, because this is not just a rat. Pussy was his best friend, so he gets that conflict, and this is something that Tony will become really known for. This is another good season, and really just shows the more deteriorating state of Tony. Again, Melfi is back as the psychiatrist, and Tony does recover and gets out of hospital. And Tony goes to him and says, he's going to be proposed for membership, so he's going to get made, and that really will and that is a storyline we will get to later into the third season. Also, Meadow graduates high school this season, so next season she starts college. Now we get into my thoughts on season 3. For me, season 3 really is a bit of a, because there were some things they obviously wanted to do, but basically decided, I would say, not to do for the third season. You see, what happened was the actress who played Olivia died around this time, and they had a big storyline planned for her, so they had to quickly change some things around. And because you see, at the end of the last season, because Tony was left with Olivia, and he gave her some airline tickets, which were kind of bought with the money from the bust out that he did in season 2. So as a result of that, they end up getting the FBI's hand, and he's arrested, and he has this big case coming up. The first episode we see is Meadow is starting college, and we get the FBI kind of surveillance of all the Soprano family members. We get an insight into Carmela, who's doing a tennis thing with Adriana, and honestly, Carmela is a bit jealous that Adriana's getting all this attention while she's not. She likes to get attention. We've explained really her character in details in the back, how she just wants this attention, she wants all this everything around her, so we get that kind of thing, especially here. We also really get a proper introduction to Patsy, who was the twin brother of Spoons. Spoons died in season 2. In fact, Patsy was part of Junior's crew, but got moved over. But like Pussy, he was spared and was brought into the fold. And Patsy is starting to go downward spiral because it's his brother's anniversary. And we get something to see in Tony. You see, Tony always likes to talk about his problems, but every time someone brings up their problems, every time, he hears someone else's problems, he just can't take it. So we get that kind of thing. It's not really that big of a thing, but I do really like that. Again, this episode is really trying to, tie up loose ends from the previous episode. We also get the episode of Olivia's funeral in this season. There's an infamous scene just before the funeral happens, just before Olivia's death. Tony goes to visit, and we get this very awful CGI. It's considered obviously one of the worst. But honestly, what were the studio left with to do? What were they gonna do? Recast Olivia? No, because she's, was perfectly casted. So they had to do this, and it also was a way of, honoring the character and essentially killing her off. Here, it's in this bit we get also an introduction to Jackie Aprile Jr., Jackie's son. Now, Jackie did appear in Season 2, but Season 3 is really where he takes more of a center stage in this particular season. And as also in this episode, we are introduced to Ralph Cifaretto, a old friend of Tony's and a made man in the crew. He's coming back, and he's considered the best earner in the New Jersey crime family. And with Richie Aprile dead, there is a vacuum to take over the Aprile crew and who to run that. Now, it would seem that Ralph would be the right choice. You see, Ralphie was in Miami, but, he's back, and he's trying to, he's a good owner, but he's also, just like Richie, a loose cannon, a bit of a wild card. However, they managed to portray him a bit differently. Like, they're similar, but they have also some contrasting differences, which I like, because the last thing I wanted was it to be too similar. Tony, throughout the season, tries his best to make sure Jackie Jr. does not get involved in the mob. He wants, as an honor to his father, to make sure that he stays out. Junior is dealing with some health issues this season, and here we get introduced to Bobby's father. He's often nicknamed the Terminator, and he's a beloved capo from the old country. Also in this season, we're introduced to Carmine Lupatazzi, head of the Lupatazzi family in New York, and the two are planning to make a business deal courtesy of these new construction, the espionage scheme, and the two families realize there could be a lot of money to be made. The new head of the Aprile crew is given to Gino. Now, Gino was placed in charge, but he's more associated with Tony. He comes from really Tony's crew, so he put him in charge. This angers Ralph Cifaretto because he really wants to be in charge, and the resentment is really building. Again, he also kind of takes Jackie Jr. under his wing because he's dating Jackie's mother, and, there is a unique relationship developing there. During the season in college, Meadow ends up dating an African American, and here we get to see Tony is a little bit racist, not in the conventional sense, but he is a firm believer of, when it comes to relationships, you stick with your own kind. And, and this is something everyone has always backed Tony's side in all this, but I never once did. Tony is outright racist and doesn't even hide it. This is, I think, really the season where we really get to see the really ugly side of Tony, but that's really the thing. Jackie Jr., of course, trying to be a member in the mob, he actually ends up dating Meadow, and they are a decent, good couple, but it's also clear that, Jackie is, feels like he's the heir apparent. He should be in the mob because of he's related to. And he uses... And this kind of gets annoying because he says he's doing everything out of respect for his father, but that's kind of the character thing. Every time he prevents a challenge, he only tries to find the easy way out and not go through with it. Also in this season, Ralph, develops a lot of problems for everyone involved. Next season we get to that, sorry. And this season begins, and also into the next season, we get this sort of Carmela and Furio relationship being flirted around. Christopher becomes a made guy in this season. He's made along with a guy named Eugene. They are made in the New Jersey crime family. And this is, but he finds out that being made is not all it's cracked up to be, and he finds it. And, it does get out of hand at some point, especially when you have Paulie and Patsy, constantly, doing this sort of cavity search with Christopher, even going into his house and ends up taking all the swag that he was actually giving to Adriana as a gift. And Paulie kind of crosses the line when Christopher, like, he notices at the corner of his eye, poorly sniff Adriana's panties. That is crossing one hell of a line. And, it's just something you just don't do. It's crossing all sorts of lines. Also, in this season, we get now the Janice ends up leaving, coming back, and tries to make a home here, and we get all sorts of that usual thing. Okay, now Jackie's storyline. He's trying to be made in the mob, but he ends up losing his relationship with Meta after, he's caught cheating, and, further gets involved in the mob life. At some point, Ralph is really causing problems for everyone, especially when he kills a woman named Tracy, who was basically a stripper, a hooker, and she had a very interesting relationship with Tony. Not that she was banging Tony, but they were having this very unique relationship, to say the least. Eventually, she is killed, and Tony is angry. He beats Ralph, but Ralph says, "You can't do that. I'm a made guy." Eventually, the fight does lead to a bit of a problem. There's tensions are rising between Ralph and Tony. They don't deny. And this is the thing, we get a bit of a drama thing here. They agree what Tony did was bad. You don't hit a made guy. And Ralph views like he's in the right here, and Tony's in the wrong. But Tony's like, yeah, what he did to the girl, he disrespected the Bing. And Sylvia agrees that is true. What happened is horrible, but she was also not related to you. She's not married to you. She's not even your gumata. Ralph has a serious beef. There's only two ways this can go. Ralph's gotta go, or you play nice. And he floats the idea of maybe, bumping Ralphie up to captain. He can't, with that type of cash. He comes up with this cash that Paulie can't. And it's clear that, tensions are very much rising. Eventually, Gino dies on the toilet, and as a result, there's a power vacuum for the charge of the Prio crew. Tony reluctantly gives it to Ralph, but it's purely a business decision, and he's not really happy about it. And that's where, but more further, and just when Ralph gets kind of to the top, further things begin to spiral. Ralph then tells a story to Jackie and a few of his crew, junior crew, if you can even call it that, about a story with Jackie's old man, Tony, and Silvio. And Ralphie also involves those three and Ralphie himself, how when they were growing up they had this crew, doing all sorts of things. Eventually they decided to rob a card game by Fish Samana, a character we'll get introduced to in season 5. And because of Tony having dad and uncle being members of the mob, and Richie having Jackie having his brother Richie being made, they managed to soften it out to where they don't get repercussions. Ralph was not on this because he got the clap, although fans have always speculated it's really because he was too scared to go along. But this card game robbing resulted in these two rising heavily higher in the ranks and getting made. They got a quicker fast track compared to Ralph. Because of this idea, Jackie decides, let's do it. Let's try and rob a card game. The card game is really Ralph's card game, where Christopher and Furio and a few guys are there, and it goes haywire, to say the least. A few end up getting killed. Jackie goes into hiding. It's badly screwed up. Ralphie does not want to kill Jackie, but Tony kind of pressures him into. Eventually, Jackie, in hiding, is eventually killed, and Meadows is distraught. Jackie's mother is distraught, and this leads to just a downward, I would almost say, spiral down this season, and it's just bad for really everyone. Not really most people, but it just really opens up really the trauma, I would say, for everyone, but not really. There's the scene where you have Corrado sing this Italian song at Jackie's funeral. But not many people turn up to pay respects to Jackie, not even if it was his father, just showing that that Jackie was not really well liked by many in the crew. Also, the relationship between Tony and Paulie kind of get a little bit deteriorated. You see, early in the season, Paulie does a Silverado does a robbery with Paulie helping get in combination, so he deserves a cut. Paulie wants a really big cut because he wants to put his mother in Green Grove, the retirement community Tony put his mother in later on. But during a sit-down, Tony sides with Ralph for the, fair cut, and this begins to further deteriorate the relationship between Tony and Paulie. And Johnny Sack, who appears in this season because he's now moved to New Jersey, he doesn't say he doesn't want to stick his beak in, it's more just a sort of way to be closer with his family. We get a fat joke told in this season, but really it'll be the next season where really it got really out of hand. And basically, Johnny Sack is trying to manipulate Paulie by saying how, that Paulie is well known over in the New York crew, and Carmine says hi. Really, and I think it's this season, or it might be the next one, Christopher goes to rehab, courtesy of his drug addiction getting out of hand. I think it's the next season, it's when it happens, but he does eventually go to rehab. The relationship between Tony and Meadow is broken by the end of this because, Meadow is torn because even though she dumped Jackie, there's still some love there, and she's trying to defend his father with what they do, trying to defend to people what her father does, but also knows that she's being kind of hypocrite. She's torn, and this is going to lead into the next season. Also, AJ gets into so much trouble this season where he is, if I recall correctly, he is sent to military school, and Tony thinks in a good way. This would, straighten him out. Carmela doesn't want this, but we eventually find out that AJ too has panic attacks that he's inherited from his dad. So we get scenes like that, really just showing that AJ does inherit a bit of his father's traits, and the more AJ becoming annoying. Look, I never found AJ just that annoying. I just found him just as a kid, but also seeing that he's very much directionless. He's not given much direction by his parents. Also, he feels very much overshadowed by Meadow, who is already smart. AJ just feels like he has nothing to bring to the table. So I always felt sorry for him in the early seasons, but eventually he will become a bit of a pain, and arguably what many people consider the worst character in TV history. So we're going to stop here. This is the first part, because The Sopranos is a very long video for me, and I want to break it up. So this is going to be part 1. The next part will be the seasons 4, 5, and 6, along with the Many Saints of New York movie and the final episode. That will be in part 2, and then I'll give you my verdict and explain how I feel about those seasons. But how do I feel about season 3? Season 3, honestly, a dip. Season 3 is beginning to dip for me. The first 2 are pretty good, but season 3 does dip. I do love the drama, but I feel that there's just almost an uneven focus in this season. I don't know if that's because of the unfortunate passing of the actress who played Olivia played a role in that, but I like to think that might have been the case. But even though it is a bit unfocused, it's still a pretty good season. Ralph Silverado is a different character, but I'm also noticing they're kind of repeating a bit of a plot line there. Think about it. A New Jersey gangster coming back to his old stomping grounds and causing havoc. But they do manage to make it different by making Ralph a different to Richie. Anyway, that's how I feel about this season. It's a dip, and it's a little bit, not dip, but a little bit unfocused, but a pretty good season overall. Please join us next time for part 2, as I'm really looking excited for that, because honestly, we reveal what I consider my favorite season, and also maybe my least favorite season of the show. Until next time, this has been the Steven Hour, and tune in for part 2.